Today, I, Andrew Gibbons, once again esteemed, or I'm not esteemed, I'm in esteemed company. Well, that started well, isn't it? I'm in esteemed company because I have Rebecca Norton once again with me. And today we're going to talk about something really, I think, fundamental. And without going too much into detail, and I won't, it's very, very significant, I think, because a whole body of people are not made the best of, and they're called introverts. So before I let you lead us on this one, Rebecca, tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and then lead us into this one. This will be good, I know.
Morning, Andrew. Lovely to chat to you again. Yep, Rebecca Norton from A Sense of Direction, life coach and wellbeing, and getting people outdoors. And this is an interesting topic to me because I would probably class myself as a bit of an introvert. And I used to be seen as very shy, so people would think that I'm very shy. But then I think when people get to know me, they think, oh well, you're not shy. And I think I used to confuse shyness with introversion before, but I have learned to recognize that that is not actually the same thing. So it's one of those tricky things where you think that people might be shy, and then you maybe treat them a little bit more sensitively, or maybe you don't want to put them on the spot. And unfortunately, that's where you can lose some of the quality of a conversation, or you can lose their ideas if you don't actively bring them into a conversation or actively bring them into a meeting. So I think that's why it's important that we need to recognise if somebody's an introvert. And it doesn't mean that they're shy, and it doesn't mean that they don't have opinions on things either.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I didn't know where this would go, and it's already going somewhere interesting. Because I reckon a lot of extroverts are shy. I reckon a lot of people who appear extroverted are disguising their introversion, maybe their anxieties, maybe their self-doubts, which is something I was talking about yesterday with Olivia De Silva. So I think we can confuse behaviour with personality and behaviour with disposition. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm already using words I don't know the meaning of. So I think it's more about disposition, and I'm trying to be clever and multitask and see if I can pull up a definition of introversion on my other screen as we do this. That might or might not work.
Yeah, I think you've raised a good point there. I think sometimes when people are quite loud and boisterous and extroverts, actually you're right. I think sometimes they're doing it because they're masking their shyness. As daft as that sounds, I think it's one of those weird sort of things that they try and sort of overcompensate for their shyness. So just because you're quiet doesn't mean that you don't think about things. It doesn't mean that you don't have opinions on things. It's maybe, and also I think it's to do with, for me, I process internally. So I take things on and I will listen to them and I will process them internally. And then I will reflect and express my opinions on it, where some people process as they're talking. Sometimes I can get them into trouble as well. But I think it's to do with that as well to some extent, the way we process information and how we respond to things.
All right, so we kicked this off well. We've already established that we don't really know what we're talking about, because it might not be what most people, ourselves included, think it might be. But that's the nature of it, isn't it? Behaviour is too easily categorised, and very often incorrectly categorised.
Yeah, and there's always a reason for behaviour, and I think sometimes this is where we get into a bit of a pickle with things, is that we assume that what we see is what we're getting, and it's not necessarily. I think sometimes you have to look beyond those first things that we see in a person. And so, I know we haven't always got time to do that, but if it's work colleagues and things, you need to get to know your work colleagues, and you need to understand that actually, these people have got some really good ideas, and I don't understand why they don't talk up in meetings, but maybe I could help them to do that.
Well, that's another thing, isn't it? I mean, I've done a bit of reading around this and watched some excellent videos on the subject. There's a lot of good stuff out there. And I think one of the things that's really troubled me in some reading I've done very recently, which touched on the best, if you like, use of introverts, is about this feeling in the workplace, which I've recognised and seen many, many times in nearly 4 decades, and that is, why don't these people talk more? Why don't these people say what they think if they think it's that important? So it becomes the person's problem somehow, that these people, these introverts, if they've got such a contribution to make, why the hell don't they do it like everyone else? As if the benchmark default best behaviour position is people who actually say what they think without thinking.
Yeah, and it's not always not always the best thing, is it? And unfortunately, we do sometimes have a culture in places of whoever shouts loudest gets listened to, and that's not a good policy. You know, you need to be thinking about, well, how do I ensure that I get everybody's contributions? How do I get everybody's opinions? How can we ensure that we're not missing out on some of these people's good ideas and things as well? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do wander around all over the place on this, and that's good because I'm dodging about on this and thinking about things I would have mentioned later. But yes, one of the things I read recently is a good way to make the best use of introverts' contributions, which can be very significant in, for instance, a group meeting where they might feel intimidated, they might feel just bored. I mean, this is it. We shouldn't judge introverts as being people who are just shy, like you say, or unwilling. They could just be almost contemptuous. Well, why the hell should I even bother to contribute to this and make known what I think that is of value, because these people are just shouting at each other? So maybe the reason people keep things to themselves is not the reasons we judge them by.
Yeah, exactly. Again, there could be many reasons why somebody doesn't want to contribute in a meeting, and often that's to do with the culture of a workplace or the meeting and things. And just as you're talking there, thinking that actually as a society we're often uncomfortable with silence, and I think that's perhaps why extroverts get listened to more, is because they're more willing to make noise in the space where perhaps it would be better to have silence. You know, and getting comfortable with that silence. Just because they're silent doesn't mean that there's nothing going on.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps your first question on the slide there, why are extroverts valued so often over introverts, is because they will fill that gap. They will make a noise when people are perhaps feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the silence.
Well, yeah, and what I was thinking was when you said just because there's silence doesn't mean there's nothing going on. Just because there's noise doesn't mean there's something going on.
No, correct. There could just be a lot of hot air basically coming out sometimes, I think, with these things.
And I'm not decrying the value of extroverts. I am one. But I am questioning, far too late in my so-called career, maybe 35 years too late, that the squelched value of introverted people. And again, in one of the things I was reading recently, it might have been a Hackman thing on team coaching, it was the point there was made was, if you're a leader of a group of people who get together and discuss matters as a team, and your introverts are quiet, talk to them in advance. Don't expect them to change the habits of a lifetime and join in with the shouting people or say things which they're not going to get shouted down. So approach your introverts and say, look, you've got a lot of contribution to make, which I don't think I'm allowing you to make the most of. Take responsibility for it as the leader, blah, 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 and get their contribution in advance. Now, that's such an obvious thing to do, but I don't think I've ever come across a team leader or a meeting chairman who's ever done that.
No, it's not. I don't think it's a regular practice. Occasionally, I might have heard people ask for, if you've got any other business or something, if you've got any contribution, then send it beforehand. But it's not the same, is it, necessarily? And I think perhaps, again, this is where we may have touched on it before. The thinking environment by Nancy Kline is really important. I think that type of environment is hugely productive for everybody, because then everybody is given space and the opportunity to contribute, and it's creating that atmosphere where it's safe to do that, isn't it? But not rushing people either. I think, so like I said, I take my time to take things in and process it. I don't always necessarily have an answer immediately, but it doesn't mean to say that I don't want to answer. It just means I just need a little bit of time, maybe an extra minute or two, just to think things through so that I can make an informed contribution.
And in that time, in a meeting's content or a group task context, that taking that time sometimes means things have moved on. The extroverts have so hijacked the agenda that they're moving at lightning speed, but they're doing things so superficially. They're doing things with no depth. and they're allowing to do that because they're hijacking a group situation. They're not allowing the respectful space for people who have thought about it more deeply, who have considered more options and have got better solutions. There's a very strong business case to do things better in respect of making better, more effective use of the introvert resource.
Yeah, I think that's actually, it's a good point you raised there. Sometimes if there's silence, people think, oh, well, that's it, the end of discussion, let's move on to the next point, and then you've missed it, and then the introvert's sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, I haven't said what I want to say yet.
It makes me think it would be really interesting to have a meeting of purely introverts. I wonder what that'd be like.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering actually. Would that be quite difficult to do, or would it just mean that it was a calmer, quieter? You'd have to have somebody still taking the lead.
Oh yeah,
And that is the thing. If you're going to have a successful meeting or a successful team, you do have to have somebody who takes the lead. But a part of that skill is being able to bring everybody together in a way that allows everybody to contribute in whatever way that's best for them.
It's a facilitative thing. It's not necessarily a leading thing. And I think a lot of this has got to do, as a workplace thing, a lot of this has got to do with the way people are led and managed in the workplace. I see a lot of responsibility within all what we're talking about here for people in positions of authority and power. And I think people in positions of responsibility and power, I would generalize based on my own experience only, just do not recognize the value of introverts, nor do they give them the space that they need and the organization would benefit from in order to make the best use of their extraordinary qualities.
That's interesting. Do you think that, I guess I'm going to answer my own question here, is I was going to say, do you think there's a lot more leaders who are extroverts? And do you know any leaders who are introverts?
Yes.
And would it make a difference if you got an introverted leader? Can you have an introverted leader?
Yes, there are plenty. Tom Peters is good on this. He's my favourite guru. He's a bit bonkers, which is probably why I like him so much. And he wears a cardigan quite a bit, and he's over-enthusiastic, but he's fantastic. Tom Peters is the man for this, I think. He mentions Hewlett-Packard. I think it's Mr. Hewlett. I forget his forename these days, but he does talk about this very issue, and he mentions many high-profile corporate leaders who are introverts. And to use a Kate Webster word, that use quiet power. It's the first two words I put on this slide. Quiet power is about going about things without shouting at people.
Yeah, and it makes a difference, doesn't it? And I imagine it's quite a different atmosphere to be led by an introverted leader than an extroverted leader. And again, it doesn't mean, I think that quiet power phrase is really important. Just because somebody's quiet doesn't mean to say that they're not confident, that they're not capable of doing a job well.
That they're not powerful.
Yeah, exactly. They have a lot of, in some respects, I see that as a sign of wisdom, being able to refrain from just blurting everything out that comes into your mind.
Okay, here's one, Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
No, all right, is he introverted? I mean, this is the trouble. We make this judgment. You started with saying shy people, which he's not. Shy people should not be confused with being categorized and pigeonholed as being introverted. Now, the Dalai Lama is not a shouting man. The Dalai Lama is not, let's say the words, a Donald Trump. The Dalai leadership style is one of careful consideration, analytical, reflective review. That is his style. Now, again, does that make him introvert in itself? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. But he's a quiet man. He uses quiet power. He uses subtle power. His power is born of the credibility and the platform he creates by his careful consideration.
Definitely, and he has a presence about him. I think again, this possibly to do with the behaviour things. Introverted people can still have a strong presence about them.
Yes.
In a room. Somebody who is shy, I think, would be very different. So somebody who's shy, they're not necessarily going to be having that strong presence, and that's where it's different in terms of recognising shyness and introversion. So you can be quiet and have a strong presence, and you can be shy and sort of like the wilting thing in the corner.
Well, Jimi Hendrix was shy. So, yeah, we're thinking extremes very often in this sort of situation. I'm thinking of football managers. How many introverted football managers are out there? They tend to be shouty people, don't they? They tend to be people who talk like this when they can do in the interview because they've been shouting all the way through a match. I know that that's how my voice sounds when I watch Gloucester Rugby. It's the only place I can go and shout and say words that I'd otherwise be arrested for in public. So success very often, I think, in all sorts of contexts, is associated with people who are forceful, who are apparently confident. Hey, introverted people are confident. People just don't look at them carefully enough to recognise it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because unfortunately, I think when you see members of Parliament talking in sort of like the government stuff, I think it's absolutely shocking behaviour, and that's a demonstration of extroverts at their worst, when all you get is shouting across each other. If you're an introvert in that situation, I can imagine it incredibly difficult to get your point heard. And
I'd love to see a parliament of introverts. That'd be fantastic.
It would. I find it incredibly frustrating watching them, and I think, what sort of example are we setting to people by just shouting at one another, not listening, and making fun of each other? It's really not a great way of educating young people, or anybody else for that matter, in how to have a conversation and how to make solutions, find solutions for problems.
It's not funny. It's not grown up.
It isn't at all.
But unfortunately, it's the news, and it's the model that we're perhaps subliminally presented with, where, you know, these people, they are supposed to be, I suppose, the personification to some degree of success, effectiveness. These people are elected by others to say, yeah, get out there and represent me. And what do? They shout at each other the whole time and don't listen. So I think we've got something big here. I think we've got something big. And I think we're still just dancing around the edges. We're saying what it is, what it isn't, what it can be confused by. So I'd like to dive straight into we've touched on it already. Let's get in there in a bit of depth. What are we missing out on? I've said the words here, by not recognising the potential and specific contributions of more reflective analytical, because I don't think we are. I don't think we are making the best of those. I think there are many, many introverted people, or people who behave in an introverted way, who are just not being given the opportunity to be the resource they can be for organisations.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on one already there, is that the fact that we're missing out on all these potential ideas, potential solutions, creativity, just because we're not listening to them, or we're not taking them on board, or we're not including them. So we're not tapping into a vast resource. That's the main problem with it, I think, really. And also we're not giving them the space to develop as people potentially either. I think sometimes they might be missed over for promotions or leadership opportunities because somebody who's more extroverted and more, you know, louder and more upfront and out there is probably more noticeable to leaders and managers, and therefore are more likely to get promoted when other people who aren't might be missed, who could be just as good or better. I
think extroverts like each other. I think extroverts feel more comfortable with each other, and I think extroverts who are currently ruling the roost, certainly in organisational corporate roles, are unlikely to see value in introverts over people like themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's just, it's like you said, it's people like themselves, don't they, unfortunately. So I think they're already sort of, it's possibly not even a conscious thing, you know. It's more probably a subtle thing, but unfortunately that's not great, because they're missing out on the potential to take their organisation much further, or develop somebody's skills and confidence and improving their business.
Well, let's go into some of that in a bit of depth and a bit more specific, Rebecca. Let's talk about what it is that introverts can contribute. We said a few words, but let's go into that in a bit more depth. Let's just rattle off some of the words we've said already. That introverts, let's get out there and say this, frankly, that introverts do better than extroverts. That this is a list of things which introverts, by and large, depending on situations and context, blah, 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 these are the things that introverts do better than extroverts. And I think they're being creative. I think they're being reflective and reviewing things. I think they're about being analytical. I think they're about generating options and solutions. Hey, all of this sounds pretty good business to me. And none of that's going on when people are shouting at each other and not stopping to think what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain ability to assimilate more information together. They have the time, because they're not necessarily wanting to get something out straight away. Like you said, they will reflect and analyze, and therefore I think they can pull more things together and actually go through a number of different options to find something that's probably better, really.
Absolutely. I'm starting to think of so many meetings that I've been in that probably would have benefited from being 2 meetings, not 1. One for the shouty people. I'm starting to question what value they have, frankly, because what is the value of a bunch of people who do nothing other than not listen to each other, force their point of view on others who aren't really interested, and not the volume of meetings? I'm starting to question genuinely the purpose and the value of extroverts in a group context. There must be some. But I'm starting to wonder if meetings that I've been in that have got a mixture of those two should have been 2 meetings.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it? But how would you do that? Would you self-select? I'm going to be in the introverted meeting.
Shouting people next door, quiet people in here. Right, let's get some work done. But, it sounds silly, but isn't it just as silly to have a mix of people that don't get the best from either?
Yes, and I think that where you've already touched on, that is down to the person who is facilitating and hosting the meeting. And maybe that's a real skill, being able to facilitate a meeting that allows everybody to have their opportunity to contribute to the meeting. And that might be, like you said, that might be approaching people beforehand and saying, I would like your ideas on this, or, you know, what suggestions do you have beforehand, and then addressing them in the meeting, but giving people space to have that contribution. And for me, I found that the thinking environment setup is incredibly powerful, because it gives everybody that opportunity. When I was introduced to that, when I was doing my teacher training, it was just absolutely amazing. It made for such a difference to the atmosphere in the classroom by doing that.
And again, I'm thinking back to recent reading of my own. To do this, I remember the words "with a light touch." When I was what I call working for a living in a real job, I haven't had one since 1992, been working myself for 28 years. I worked with an Australian guy, very often the 2 of us together working on management programs in an organization as employees. And he was dreadfully insensitive. He had some very bad jokes, which I won't even try and go near. But he would say things like, "So, Rebecca, haven't heard from you all day. What's your thoughts on this?" I thought, "Oh no, please don't do it like this." And they would say, "Oh no, it's okay. I'm all right. I'm all right." And I thought, no, that is entirely the wrong way to do that. It was well meaning, but it was wrong.
And I think this is where it has to be really considered, because he probably thinks he's trying to draw people in, and which he is, but he's just doing it in the wrong way, you know. So you can't just you can't always just go around to people and put them on the spot and say, "Oh, what do you think?" There has to be a format to the meeting or to the group that allows that in a gentle sort of way.
Absolutely, and again, that's a skill. That's a skill. It's a skill to recognise the need to do this. It's a skill beyond that to actually do it well. And again, I'm thinking back. I've not seen very many people with the inclination or the skill set to do that. I really haven't.
No, I mean, this is possibly another topic for discussion at some point. The skills of a host of a meeting or chairing a meeting. I have been in some dreadful meetings, and I think, unfortunately, if they're not handled in the right way, nobody comes out of it feeling good, and nothing really gets done. I mean, it's all right asking for people's opinions, but then you actually have to implement them and listen to them, rather than just sort of, you know, pay lip service to them as well.
Yeah. I've been in meetings of all sorts over, again, very many years, and it's making me think of something else which is related to this. I had a first boss who was very skilled politically, both with the large P, he was mayor of the city in which I live at one point, and with a small p as well, he was able to maneuver and work power in groups. And one of the things that I saw him do, he was not an introvert. He was not what I would categorize as a natural introvert, but sometimes he would play the role. He had this skill set which allowed him to deliberately behave in certain ways. And I've seen him in meetings keep quiet when I expected him to have points of view. And I thought, what's he doing here? Because I thought it's quite interesting, this. Well, because I was there with all the shouting people, not listening to each other, and he would just be sitting there looking reflective and engaged. And then when he chose to say something, suddenly everything went quiet, because he was choosing that moment to judge the best time to make a contribution, which wouldn't have been given such attention if he'd been amongst all the shouty people.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly a skill of an introverted person, is they will actually consider when to contribute more. It's not just a case of I want to get my point of view across. It's more about, well, have I genuinely got something of value to add at this point? Do I need to understand a little bit more about what's going on? I want to hear other people's opinions first before I make my own decision. I want to be able to add something of value. I'm not just going to blurt something out that comes straight into my head.
Yeah, and I think introverts are less likely to come to that positive conclusion on their own. I think to feel that they're valued should come from somewhere other than purely themselves.
Yeah, and again, that's down to the chair of the meeting, isn't it? A lot of the time, of thanking people for their contribution. I think that's important as well. Thanking people genuinely for a good contribution is likely to encourage people to contribute more. You have to feel that your contributions are valid and worthwhile and going to be listened to. And again, that's potentially where it is difficult for introverts, because it's quite difficult anyway for them potentially to make a contribution. But then if they feel like actually they're just not going to be listened to, or it's just going to be brushed over, then they feel, well, there's no point in me contributing at all.
Well, the other thing is there's the legacy factor, isn't there? Or the baggage factor, or the historical factor. There's the feeling of it's always like this. In this context, I'll just ride it out because it's not going to change. And I think it's very hard you mentioned the word culture earlier. If the culture is to not respect introverts, if the culture is to have noisy meetings with poor conclusions because you haven't thought about things, all you've done is shout at each other, then if that's the culture, then it's a very difficult culture to break. It's very difficult for someone in a position of authority, and we keep talking about meetings because meetings are the obvious forum, but it doesn't purely have to be meetings. It could be in all sorts of other situations. But I think the essential thing for me is breaking a culture which is up to then not valued introverts is a hard thing to do.
It is very difficult, and I think that's when you need maybe somebody external to come in, or a new person to come in and to start afresh and feel like, right, we're going to start fresh, we're going to try something new, we're going to try something different. It might be a little bit weird, it might feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but ultimately this will serve everybody and the organisation to do that. You're right, it is difficult to break that culture, because if you start coming in and say, right, that's it, we're doing it differently, they're not going to listen, and they're not going to, they're going to say, hang on a minute, who do you think you are coming and doing this?
What book have you just read?
Yeah, exactly. I remember naively, I thought I could go in and change the culture of I worked for a charity for a little while, and we would have regular committee meetings, and they were horrendous. And I naively thought, oh, I could try the thinking environment thing there, and it's like that went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not making known some of the contexts of my own meetings, good or bad or indifferent, but they've also been in my own time and of a representative nature, but I won't go into that any further than that. But some of those were the best meetings ever attended. But I mean, the key thing here is what we keep coming back to, and I think the point that I'm going to keep banging on about is we're losing out. We're losing out by not finding a way to engage and to make the best use of introverts. And as we've only very recently been saying, there is a hard thing to do, to change the way the dynamics work in an organization, to give those people suddenly the space they've never had before. This is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it is, and it has to come top down, I think, in this sort of in that context, because ultimately it's the top that's going to have the influence. It's them who's going to be noticed, who can make strategic changes to things. So it's all right, somebody coming in with a new idea, but unless they've got either a supportive manager or somebody who's genuinely interested in making changes, it probably isn't going to happen. So it's got to be a top-down thing, I think, really.
It's a lot tougher. Excuse me. Oh dear. It's a lot tougher. I'm coming to realise in this half hour we've had so far, it's a lot tougher to make this happen than I might have assumed, because you can read all this stuff, you can think all about it, and you can watch a video by Susan Cain or Jane Webster, and you think, wow, yeah, this is great. Organisations should do this. And then you think, hang on a minute, it's tough. It's very hard to undo what past practices have been. It's very hard to do it subtly. I mean, what are you going to do? Give everybody in an organisation a psychometric test that says, right, those are our quiet people. Right, we're going to have a quiet person's initiative. And that's blundering about. It's a difficult thing to manage, isn't it, in terms of the transactional unit level and also corporately, to get the best out of your introverts.
Yeah, I think it's possibly something that, I guess it could go either way. You could have a major overhaul, you get somebody new in and think, right, okay, we're starting afresh completely. I would like to try something new, and you could try it that way. Or it might be a case that you actually have to just do things a little bit differently at a time and make it more of a subtle change over time and gradually improve the culture of a place by trying one or two different things. And it's almost like having to break the pattern, isn't it, really, and starting again. So, you know, briefly before we started recording this, we were talking about getting out and about for thinking and planning. And it's almost like, I think, taking people out of their normal environment where this normally happens is a good way of breaking that cycle, because it's like, oh, this is a bit different to start with. So while we're out here, while we are away from the office, the four walls, the meeting room, whatever it is, let's try something new. Let's try this in a different way. And I think sometimes taking people out of that regular environment gives those people who are quieter, those introverts, a different opportunity. I think that you know, when you have these team away days and things, you're putting people in a different environment that can actually have a massive impact on now who is going to start contributing more.
Yeah, I have a cynicism around this. I hope it's not a cynicism. I have a realism. Let's try and keep it at that. That however evident the value from doing these things are, I don't detect an appetite in organisations, in individuals, to do the hard work that it takes, because it is hard work. I think I keep coming back to a term that Alan Shepard, then Lord Shepard, who became chairman of Grand Metropolitan, and when he moved on to the board, he said, one of the things we're going to do now is to change the culture. We are no longer going to have a culture of acceptable underperformance. And one way in which I think organizations settle for acceptable underperformance is the use of their introverts. They say, okay, that we haven't run aground without doing anything for them. Let's just leave things as they are. Organizations, particularly at times of great uncertainty and anxiety, as we are now talking during the pandemic, organizations for me don't have a great appetite to do things differently when doing things the way they've always been done has been good enough, but not really very good at all.
Yeah, there's that security and familiarity, isn't there? You know, it's familiar and therefore it's comfortable. Not necessarily the best thing, but it's familiar, and we know where we are with things, we know how things work. It might not be the best thing, but we know at least what it's that dealing with uncertainty, isn't it? Like you're saying, and actually it's taking a longer term view. So ultimately at the beginning, it might be very difficult, it might be uncomfortable to try something new, to change a culture, but long term it's likely to serve everybody better, the business, the employees, their clients or customers, whoever it is that they're dealing with. So you do have to take a long term view, and this is where I guess in today's sort of environment, that's not always possible because of redundancies or changing in funding streams or changes in staff members and what have you. So you're right, it's not an easy thing to do, unfortunately, but if you can stick with it and persevere, then the gains are massive.
I think so. And I've been working with a client in a senior position in a large organization who is clearly introverted, considers herself to be, and by the way, I don't think there's a gender issue here. I don't think people are more or less likely to be introverted because they're female or male. I don't think, but I've not got any grounds to believe that's intuition. Anyway, when I've been working with this person, I won't name the organization, we've talked about these issues. This is what got me into the whole area of introversion. This was about 8 months or so ago. And I found myself becoming interested in it and looking for and finding sources around it as a result of my conversations with this person. For 38 years in this business, I'd not had such a conversation. So it's great to have such worthwhile learning experiences, to think about introversion for the first time, which is what that did. Where I'm going with this is, we got into a conversation which basically was around, I'm an absolutely rock solid introvert. Do I make the conscious decision to be more like people I'm not, or do I stay with who I am? And that was, for me, a very interesting discussion, because I got a funny feeling that a lot of introverts will feel somehow the need to behave like others that aren't who they really are. My gut feeling is, value who you are and what you can do, and somehow find more of a voice for it, which is very easy to say and harder to do. But I think, I'm not one, a lot of introverts may well, I'll keep qualifying, go through this discussion of, do I need to change my personality? You can't do that. You can just behave in different ways. Or do I value who I am?
Very good question, and a really good point there. Yes, the answer is yes. Yeah, I can fully understand that, and the difficulty with, or the problem with trying to change yourself to meet other people's expectations is you're not going to be happy in the long run. It's not you, and you're going to end up creating yourself an awful lot of stress further down the line. I think you're right in saying that stick with who you are and find a way around it. There's other skills that you can learn that will sort of, I want to say compensate, but I don't mean compensate. I don't think it's a bad thing to be introverted, but there's other skills or other ways that you can get round this problem. And that's the thing, it feels like it is sort of being lumped on the introvert as their problem, not the other side of it. And that's unfair. It might be realistic, but it is unfair. But I think it's really important that you stick with who you are and just develop other skills around that.
I think so. And the more we discuss this, the more I'm becoming aware myself that there's a huge responsibility, with a capital R, on people with authority in organizations to do this better.
Yes, there is. I think the responsibility has to come down to the team leaders, the managers, the people hosting the meetings, or the chair people, or whatever it is. They have to take some responsibility in ensuring that everybody gets a fair whack at contributing.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, diversity means a lot of things to people, and the obvious ones are those we need not list, because we could all come up with the same list as everyone else when it comes to considering diversity and inclusion. And I'm not being flippant here. How often do we ever think about people by personality, which is a mental health issue, potentially, not being valued, not being given the same space, not being respected? And so maybe there's an element of diversity and inclusion which genuinely ought to be considered around introversion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the problems with this is, again, it comes down to that change thing. We're not always very good at introducing changes. We've done it this way, and therefore, it's not really broken, so let's not try and fix it. It might not be the best thing, but it's being more aware, I think, and allowing the time and the space to try something new. And it's not going to work straight away, probably. There are going to be problems. There's going to be teething issues and stuff. But it's allowing for that, because I think sometimes people get a little bit worried if they try and introduce a change, they don't get good response, it didn't work, so let's just go back to how it was, rather than thinking, okay, well, maybe we need to approach it in a different way, or what can we change here and there to still make it better, rather than just reverting back to what it was before just because it didn't work on the first attempt. Very rarely does anything work on the first attempt.
Yeah, I think you were right to point out that we're in a particularly risk-averse, exposed place now where people will not want to break the norm for fear of making it look like they're not on top of things. And this is another such one of those. I don't want to feel negative about this. I don't want to feel at all that this is so difficult a thing that's impossible. But I'm becoming more and more aware that this is not an easy thing to do. And I'm concerned that there are sufficient body of frontline operational unit level leaders and managers that have got the interest or capability to do this.
It's about developing that skill set in people, isn't it? And creating that culture of, like you said, the equality and diversity.
Have
allowing
you ever
people
crossed a management or leadership program that has any element of looking after your introverts? I haven't.
Probably not. No.
I haven't, and yet, you know, it would be outrageous to say, oh, let's just not consider the women or the men. But another way in which you could differentiate the whole human race is in this way.
It is really, isn't it? Yeah, it's one of the things that we often categorize people with. Are you introverted or are you extroverted?
But honestly, I'm thinking now for the first time ever, I have never, ever in any accredited, structured, syllabus-driven program or anything else that I've put together or anyone else that I've seen, I have never seen expressly and explicitly a prompt to consider the value of introverts at all ever since 1982. And that's disappointing.
Yeah, I think there's been a focus on, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic styles of learning, which is different. It's not the same. I guess that's a nod in the right direction, but that's not actually acknowledging personality things there.
Not at all. Oh, well, hey, look, we just created ourselves a whole new opportunity here, Rebecca. You heard it first here. The Gibbons, Norton Gibbons introversion, extroversion mix project started here live. And I didn't know I was going to say that. And this is the value of these interactions. I didn't know I'd say that. I hadn't intended to say that. I hadn't intended to think about that. And I wouldn't have thought about it if we hadn't been knocking about it interactively.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. I'm happy to start with. There are certainly things that are probably quite easy to implement and do.
So. Yeah.
It's just a case of being a little bit more aware and conscious about it, isn't it?
Oh, I think there's something there. Anyway, we'll have that discussion off recording, but
yes.
So we're approaching that time. We're not quite there yet, but we're approaching that time when we'll be summarising and say, what do we most want to take out of this? And so, given that there's a lot in this, I'd like to start that review at this point. And one of the things that is again going through my mind is the responsibility thing. We talked about that. And it's about recognition at operational level of who are your introverts, who aren't you getting the most from. And I also want to throw around the fact that, yes, there is a body of knowledge out there. We both know it. We've both had a bit of a contact with it. There are people, academics out there, Harvard people like Susan Cain, TED Talk people like Jane Webster, who is, for me, more credible as someone talking about introversion, because she stands there very stiff in a TED Talk saying, I am an introvert, I don't really like doing this, as opposed to people like Susan Cain, who very personable and capable that she is clearly not an introvert. But there's a lot of stuff out there, isn't there, about how to get more from introverted people. So there's no excuse for not getting out there and finding it. It is there to be found.
Correct, yeah. It's just acknowledging that it is, I don't necessarily want to say issue, but yes, it is a potential issue, isn't it? I think it's acknowledging that it exists, that there is a difference between the way introverts and extroverts work. There is a potential lack in getting the best out of both people as well. I know I don't want this to become like an extrovert bashing session or anything like that. I'm like I say, I'm more of an introvert, and I'm all right with that. But but I think there's a lot to be said around how to facilitate teams and meetings that bring out the best of both.
Oh, I like that. I like that, and I'm glad you brought it up in minute 45 because in our debrief afterwards, we often say some of the most useful stuff. Oh no, why aren't we still recording? And I think I'd have really regretted you not saying that because that's making me think. Yes, we aren't extrovert bashing. I am to a degree. I'm starting to question in a group context what value they have. I really am. But I would say that if this wonderful new style of operational leader we're talking about that has the facilitative skills and the insight to do this properly, that person will recognize that introverts can help extroverts because a confident, articulate introvert can say, hold on a minute, too much shouting, not enough thinking. Can we just calm ourselves down a bit? No, so I think introverts can help extroverts get more out of themselves with their idea generation, the speed of thought, the excitable energy they bring. I can't think much else. There's not a lot of substance. So we're not talking about segregating them, although I did earlier. We are talking about creating a more positive synergy and outcome from the proper mix of the two of them than we're currently getting.
Yeah, I genuinely think that they can help each other. They could actually complement each other really well. Like you say, the introverts can help extroverts to just slow down and take things on board a little bit more, where extroverts actually might be able to help introverts become a little bit more animated if that's appropriate, you know.
Yeah,
and
that idea you've just made known would have been far too good to have kept to yourself. I wish you did a bit more of that. You know, that's what extroverts are saying in a somewhat cumbersome manner. But you're right, they can complement and help each other.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely room for both to complement each other on there.
Cool. I think we should end this one and start work on our new program for the intro extra program.
It sounds like a good place to stop.
So give me your one, confine yourself to that. Give me your one takeaway from this that maybe you didn't expect.
I think acknowledging that it's the responsibility of the team leader, team manager, or chairperson, or whoever's hosting an event or a meeting. It's actually their responsibility to bring the best out of people in that meeting or event.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm with you on that. And I think the thing that I'm thinking much more personally and much more deeply than I would have done is about what value do extroverts bring? And that isn't a total sweeping away of their potential value. It's just that the way they're currently used is probably very, very low level.
Yeah.
Ooh, thank you ever so much once again. Well, I got a lot from that. I don't know if anyone's ever going to listen to this and get something too. I hope so. But certainly it worked for me. Thank you very much indeed.
Yep. Thank you.